Well, thank you for that generous introduction. Feels a little immodest, but I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for coming out. I hope it won't disappoint. Thanks, Nate, and everyone for inviting me. It's lovely to see new friends, old friends, and all of you. I'm really excited to be here to present something of my work and my thoughts. But I should begin with just pointing out that I have two amazing partners, Ernesto Cragnolino and Tim Whitehill, and 8 extraordinary architects in the office, and they all share authorship for the work. The firm is named for me probably erroneously, because it really, I'm part of this, but they certainly share authorship for the work. And I don't mean to present the work that we're doing as, I do a sketch and then everybody else there just helps out to envision it. They're very much part of it. But on behalf of the firm, I'm very happy to be here. Let me start by just explaining a little bit about the structure of the talk. Actually, I'll go back to that slide. I'm going to spend the first sort of few minutes laying out a set of values from which I think the work arises, and then a proposal from which the work might be understood. And then I want to share 5 houses with you, 4 in Austin to underline some of our particular interests and aesthetic sensibilities, and then 1 in Dallas that I want to spend a little bit more time on. To begin, I should explain that I believe that architecture is really understood in intimate moments, rather than in kind of abstract ideas or kind of organizational principles. It's really in one's encounters and experiences in and around buildings that one really understands architecture. In this regard, it's a little odd to show a lot of photographs, because one experiences with all one's senses, but I'm going to try and overcome that with showing a lot of photographs in a lot of kind of intimate moments. And maybe that helps explain the kind of format of some different formatting to the different slides I'll show. For me, it's a real honor to present the Frank Welch Memorial Lecture. While I didn't have the pleasure to know him personally, his work helps reposition our view of modern architecture in, I think, a really profound way. And it serves as an important touchstone for me for the possibilities of a powerful modern architecture that's directly engaged with its circumstance and one that revels in its own material presence. As both an academic and a professional, I've spent a significant portion of my career trying to rescue modern architecture from its understanding as something ruthless and unforgiving. And in this regard, Frank Welch's work is instructive. I would say in its clear and considered attitude towards landscape, its forthright enthusiasm for innovative building methods, and through its essential modesty and expressive reticence, his architecture really bears witness to ambitions that are truly worthy of our attention. However, the modern principles that define his work also serve as a foundation for our work, or at least I like to think they do. And I want to underline 4 of those principles as a way just to begin. 1, expressive reticence is consistently prized above the gratuitous manipulation of form. Our buildings privilege the direct corporeal experience of architectural space and form over didactic legibility. The second is that normative construction techniques provide a basis for all of our work, while at the same time structural ingenuity is sought out everywhere. 3, each building is conceived as a direct response to its particular situation. Rather than providing directions for consistency, context is engaged into dialogue, and the buildings serve as vehicles to elevate those conditions that are compelling, suppress those that are problematic, and reinforce those that need support. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the serendipity of nature and social occasion is consistently valued over composition, its temporal condition highlighted against the background of permanence in building. And on this last point, I should just dwell a moment, as it's really important to me. I'm suggesting a slightly different aesthetic principle to the compositional strategies often promoted in the field. Mine is an argument for a particular way to pose a building, one more in sync with, shall we say, Japanese aesthetic philosophies of wabi-sabi, for example, where architecture acts as a prime canvas for putting forth the beauty of the natural and the excitement of the exception, where serendipity is prized above formal composition and order. In our work, we're most interested in embracing nature, for example, through highlighting the beauty of a meandering oak limb, or the shadows that fall from a stand of timber bamboo swaying in the breeze, the amazing orange of a Texas sunset, or the meandering patterns of wood grain. We're far more interested in that than in presenting an ordering system that arises from any given circumstance. In those ways, I feel like, at least from afar, I feel a certain kind of kinship with Frank. And if it's not already clear, these kind of square framed images are meant to be these sort of intimate moments that I won't particularly explain. I thought I'd go through them a little faster. From a kind of collection of different projects, most of which I'm not going to show. Gosh, I love that one. This is my ode to the kind of bay window where Anne and her daughter kind of sat every night reading stories, looking over Austin. Wait, I said I wasn't going to explain them. So I'm just going to go through the kind of 4 houses in Austin. And for those of you that know Austin at all, this kind of this encompasses the kind of different conditions of kind of living in Austin, the sort of condition of sort of down south in this sort of 60s suburban condition, just post-war suburbs, and then sort of out a bit along the lake. And then we'll go a couple hundred miles north to Dallas, that way. The first house I want to show you is a house we call the Lakeview House, which is here. And it's sort of, just if people know Austin, it's really at the top of 45th Street and Perry Lane, the top of this sort of ridge overlooking the Brightleaf Preserve, which will always stay undeveloped, down this hill towards the Pennybacker Bridge. Quite an extraordinary site. And I'm showing it in a large part because I want to explain something about how sequence is inculcated in our work, but also a kind of certain thesis about detail. After that, I'll show you the Constant Springs house, where I really want to explain this, our interest in circumstance and the latent possibilities of a site. Then moving to this Tarrytown residence, where we talk about a certain sensibility, and the Cuernavaca residence, where I want to explain a kind of interest in materials, detail, and a restrained palette. And then when we move to Dallas, hopefully all these things will be present in the house here. So I'm going to go through these things relatively kind of quickly, because I'm already probably past the time that I want it to be. But if there's time and if people want to, I really love answering questions, so I hope people will have some. So this is the circumstance of this house we found on a kind of sort of a cul-de-sac at the top of this hill with these very beautiful live oaks, and then this incredible view overlooking, well, you don't really see a lot of this, but this sort of undeveloped bit that then allows you a kind of unimpeded view of Austin. The site was an interesting one where you were really at the top of the hill, at this sort of plateau, with a series of kind of great live oaks, and then it kind of cascaded down with a kind of forest of cedars, junipers, I guess. And we structured the house really as where the circumstance was so interesting. We wanted to site the house right on this ridge between these two conditions, and that it would be a building that would help to negotiate one's experience from one world into another and then back again. It's orchestrated as a kind of fairly straightforward modernist house with a very large flat roof that allows for one to kind of easily pass between these and around these trees and through the landscape, and then guided slightly by these oddly shaped sort of objects. This explains the organization a little bit with a kind of big flat roof with a series of sort of screens and funny shaped objects that allow you to kind of or encourage you to negotiate the site in an interesting way. When it comes in, the car gets kind of put over to the side. When it comes through this very beautiful field of live oaks, getting some idea of the view. And while it'd be nice to kind of explain the whole plan, I put it up really just to sort of point out that there's a sequence here. Well, part of it is the organization. There's there's a kind of private wing here with kids' bedrooms and master upstairs, and the living part of the house is the public part is all in here, with a guest house at the bottom. But it's set up as really a one-room wide house, where with these couple of blinders to keep the focus that way, and that the building ends up again negotiating between the world of this beautiful grove of live oaks and this incredible view to the west. And as one meanders through, one is kind of given a series of hints. Expectations are set up, and then along the way, discoveries are made that kind of distract and encourage the user to start to see the world a little bit differently. So one meanders through this this grove of live oaks into a kind of lush garden around these timber-clad volumes. You get a hint of that there's some kind of an extraordinary view to come, but as one starts to enter, your view is kind of taken back to a front porch which looks back towards the street, and inside where one gets this sort of experience that I like to think is a little more like the way artists talk about modernism than the way architects do. I mean, architects often talk about modernism, or at least the layman's version of modernism is a kind of fairly abstract white volume that's sort of simple and clean, I guess. But like when you ask a layman what like a modern painting would be like, they might look to Picasso or Braque, where you see the front of someone's face, the side, what they're thinking, them in movement. There's a kind of multiplicity and complexity that I think was really the kind of pleasure of modernism. And here, I like this photograph. The photographers never like these things, but I like the photograph because it kind of catches both transparency and reflection, which is the reality of glass. And as the light moves, this becomes very dynamic. But it's the view is sort of always present. This is just an iPhone photograph on a kind of sunset, but it's one gets the idea of what the view is like, and then looking to the west, and then the east is a much more intimate one. I put this drawing up because I just thought it helped to explain something about how the architecture helped to frame the engagement with the landscape, and also how the sort of devices were present that were hopefully helping to allow one to kind of see the world in a little bit different way. In order to kind of engage significant trees closely, there's a kind of trick to getting close without hurting the roots and things like that. But I really wanted to bring your attention to this part. This is a building that we come in on grade, even though the land is starting to drop down, you come in as if it's a flat. And by the time you get here, you're 30 inches above the kind of pool deck and significantly above the trees and things. And what happens here in this kind of making up that 30 inches of difference is that's a planter, which seems mundane. But what happens, which is really super lovely, is that's planted with succulents and flowers and an herb garden in front of the kitchen. And so as one gets that extraordinary view, sorry, I guess I thought I had an image of that view, but as one gets that extraordinary view, it's always framed by the intimate views of these kind of beautiful sort of things that one appreciates at a very close level. And so the contrast of this extraordinary long view against a close one is, I think, make both more powerful, and it allows one to appreciate the particularities of each of these conditions. I also wanted to put in a little bit about a kind of ethic, shall we say, in construction, in making. We to a fault, care a lot about how things are made, about how they're detailed, but unlike, I guess, some architects who care a lot about making, I'm not actually interested in fetishizing things. Like I love architects that design incredibly beautiful things, but in the end, I feel like one of the things that I appreciate the most is when somebody goes to one of the homes we've built and appreciates the view and the kind of sunset and things like that, and forgets to like look at the architecture. Like my hope is that the building acts more like a primed canvas than it does an object to look at. And so while I can't do anything as beautiful as the shadows that fall from these beautiful trees, the live oaks, I can make a surface that hopefully accepts them in a way that accentuates them. I don't know how many people in the audience are old enough to remember your loudness button on a stereo, but I like to think of this as a little bit like that, the thing that would boost the bass and the treble and make the music sound more present. And it's a kind of a simple thing. It's a 5/4 and half-inch material that is milled to allow blind fasteners, and but then you get these kind of beautiful shapes that I think accentuate the shadows, and then that kind of attention to how we would like turn a corner or make something present but subtle. It's contrasted with a different way to do a window, where the window is framed into a kind of a steel box, where the consequence of that is you get a condition of incredible reflectivity on the outside against deep shadow, because the window is set up without any frame. And then on the inside, where the window passes past the inside panels, you get a condition where if the glass is clean, you can't actually tell there's any barrier. Robert Irwin wrote fairly extensively about, the artist Robert Irwin, about how we understand distances is actually through kind of measuring off of like the frame of a window helps us see how far away things are. And we did a little home tour of this building once, and there were all of these people that went there and kind of slowly put a finger out to see if there was anything there. Like, why isn't it hot inside? And I like those kind of things that create a sort of beguiling effect. There are other things, in Austin, it's such a benign climate. I mean, I come originally from the Northeast, and I was so taken by this condition that, okay, it's hot in the summer, but it's not like Chicago. Like, the delta between inside and outside is, maybe when it's 100 out, maybe you want it to be 75 inside. It's not that much. It's not like Chicago, where you want it to be 70 inside and it's negative 20 out. And so, like, we don't actually need to insulate in quite the same way. And now I'm not suggesting, like, you can't be an architect in 2020 and not be interested in sustainability. But, the opportunity to, for example, turn a corner with monolithic glass as opposed to insulated glass allows for quite extraordinary spatial effects. So even in a small room, to turn a corner without an IGU, so we don't have a black line there. Like, there's no Photoshop in this image. It allows kind of a building to open up in a way or a room to open up into the landscape that's quite profound. And in our climate, we can do that, which is, I mean, on some days when it's hot and humid outside, we might get a little condensation, but for 360 days of the year, it's pretty extraordinary. And the outside of the building is meant to take water anyway. So, and in a funny way, I feel like this is a certain kind of register for the climate. And then other things that are kind of really mundane, like how you get water off a building. I mean, flat roofs have been, inculcated as part of modernism forever, but certainly in the United States. But to avoid the kind of overlapping flashing and connections and things, we do this. Well, also the kind of problem of how to get water off. We ended this roof in a lightweight steel channel that is usually used for stringers, because you can weld them together because they're straight, because they don't ding up, they don't have to be flashed, and we get this kind of thinner profile that acts as a datum against which, like, the beautiful trees are understood. So we knew we were going to have these long stretches of roof edge, and for me it was like really important that those would be straight and plumb and uninterrupted, not so that you looked at how beautiful those things were, but so that they could act as a kind of elegant datum against which you would start to see the meandering tree limbs. And that, the folks here really enjoy it, clearly. Some images of this. The second house I wanted to show you, it's funny how one makes notes for things and then doesn't look at them. I did have really profound things to tell you all, but they're all written in here. The second house I wanted to show you was a different condition in Austin. It's South Austin, and it's an area people call Rollingwood, but it's not actually in Rollingwood. It's in the county. And it's one of these kind of suburban developments near the school and things like that. And it was a really interesting client who came to me with this. He had been looking for an appropriate site to sort of downsize from a 8,000 square foot house, and wanted to live kind of closer with his family, and had come into the office a number of times to talk about working. And when he found a site, and he showed up one day with this piece of property, and it was a really interesting opportunity to live simultaneously near the center of the city, and at the same time as in an isolated refuge. So for me, that presented this really powerful circumstance for this family of four. These kind of places, lots of suburban houses, fairly close by. It's a third of an acre lot. But we noticed pretty quickly that there was this creek, often dry creek, a seasonal creek, that went through here with a lot of section, and we realized that we had an opportunity at the end of this street with no one being able to be here, and because of the way the slope in the site, that we could do effectively a glass house in the middle of the suburbs. I like this image someone took from a drone, just because I like these kind of funny pools that people did in the 60s and 70s, and then like the holes we did in the roof of ours. The house is organized. It was a fairly steeply sloping site with two really big, beautiful live oak trees, and we put this kind of very large roof as a kind of datum under which, or as a collector, as a way to kind of define the precinct of the house. But much of it would be outside, and found that, so we have this sort of big roof that one tree passes through and another opens up to allow rain to come into the house. And it's organized where one comes into a kind of private courtyard through landscape and walls and things around these couple of beautiful trees, 3 beautiful trees. I think my pointer is dying. I don't know, can you see it? I can't anymore. Oh well. Well, I wonder if I can use the cursor. Yeah. So a little more awkward. So this kind of beautiful courtyard, and then a kind of another outside courtyard that's raised. The thing I want to show you this for, this is very hard to use, is I'm going to stop. Hopefully it will be clear. The land sloped quite dramatically, but we noticed that this one live oak tree had a very straight, tall trunk, and we could adjust the landscape in other places, and then you can't pile earth on the roots of a tree or you kill it. But we could outside the critical root zone, we could pile up some earth, and then we could make a kind of deck. So it felt like you were coming in effectively on grade. Meanwhile, you were fairly high already in the ground. So you came into this house feeling like you're just on a regular surface, and by the time you got to the other end of the living room, the other side, you were 14 feet out of the ground. And it created this really beautiful circumstance where this is the kind of entry courtyard. There's my pointer again. This is that tree I was talking about. This is about 6 feet above where the tree kind of comes into the ground. And this is the kind of critical root zone of this tree. So we piled up some earth here, put a kind of retaining wall up, and this is all deck. But what's really beautiful is, I have these in a different order. This is the courtyard that you enter into, and then you can see this sort of glass house condition where you see through into the escarpment, the trees in the escarpment. And the point I was going to make is now long past. But the thing that I find interesting about this is being able to make a glass house on 1/3 of an acre with neighbors very close by. I mean, I love the Farnsworth house and I love Philip Johnson's glass house, but it is one thing to do a glass house on many acres that you own and control, and another to do when you have neighbors that are as close by as this one. And in many ways, I find this more interesting. And actually, there was a bit that I had meant to read at the beginning, which is probably why that went so quickly. Because I left out this little bit that just was a kind of proposal that in addition to intimacy, I wanted to kind of talk about. And now it seems like a good moment to mention it as well. In addition to thinking that you understand architecture in intimate moments, I also feel like that architecture really is most interesting as something that deals with conflicts. And I believe that it's the odd circumstances and really peculiar problems that are endemic to any given project that give rise to the most compelling buildings. In this context, I hope my work argues for that an architecture that occurs at the site of conflicting desires is actually the most compelling one. And by conflicting desires, let me explain with some examples. I think architecture really occurs where the desire for view conflicts with the necessity for the protection from the western sun, where the desire for lightness conflicts with the requirements for structure, where the desire for mystery conflicts with the appeal for pragmatism, where the desire for connection conflicts with the demand for privacy, and where the desire for permanence conflicts with the aspiration for serendipity. Every building we do begins with seeking out and engaging the kind of conflicts that are intrinsic to their individual circumstances. So when we were doing this building, there was a kind of desire to live in a glass house, but also to have privacy. And that created a circumstance that I found very, very powerful. So they don't, we went through, do we want to put in roller blinds or anything? And they didn't. And they find that no one can ever sort of see in, and the kind of pleasure of living in a glass house sort of just on the other side of the wall where your neighbors are is kind of exciting. What can I say? When one enters this house, this is the condition I was looking for before. Like this little dining area is 14 feet in the air, and it's just kind of caught right in the trees. And this is the master bedroom. Like it feels like there are many acres that they control, but this is just a consequence of this public right-of-way along the creek. And then that's their real living area. It's the sort of outside living room where the hole in the roof allows access to the sky, but also allows rain to come into the middle of the house, outside, obviously, but in the middle of the sense of where the house starts and stops, as almost a kind of poetic condition. Right? And then, of course, all of the lovely and serendipitous things that arise out of setting up a circumstance like this, where light reflects off of a pool onto the walls and the ceiling. I mean, there's some logic to having a pool that is significantly shaded in Texas, particularly in the afternoon. But to me, like the kind of pleasures that arise out of this, where sun in the morning reflects off the pool into this kind of powerful and overarching roof, is pretty powerful. They have a very cute dog too. Right. And then just a kind of series of images that just hopefully explain a little bit of how you live in this thing. Okay. The third house I wanted to show you is entitled the Tarrytown House. And it's yet another condition, suburban condition in Austin, in an area called Tarrytown, which is just west of the university, caught between the river and the university, and is a kind of post-war development. Where the land value has become very, very valuable, and it is and is equivalent in some ways to Highland Park. This is an area of it with smaller lots, but it also has areas with much bigger lots along the water. And so many of these kind of ranch houses, having outlived their kind of lives, are getting torn down and rebuilt, and ours was one of those circumstances. And for us, the design of this house was a kind of opportunity to inject, how do I say this, a tone of modernity into an otherwise traditional post-war neighborhood. And the building is set up to define a private landscape as the center of this family home. So it's set up because all of these buildings are changing. We wanted to do a building that would live inside and outside and have these kind of defined precincts. It did have a couple of very large trees, one of them, over here, which didn't allow us to build in there, but we wanted to define this kind of beautiful family courtyard, and then a front, more formal courtyard where the living area was caught between these two worlds. And we set up these couple of two-story bookends so that depending on whatever would get torn down and built here, which happened just as we completed construction, or whatever would happen across the street, wouldn't impede on their privacy. So, right, this is the plan, and the street along the corner, one enters around this kind of garden into here, and this is the kind of main living area of the house, caught between that courtyard and that courtyard, a more formal one and a casual one. Right. So the presence of this building is a little enigmatic, but in my mind it was intended to kind of keep at some level the scale that was there, with a sort of single-story volume, although albeit articulated in a slightly different way, and then having these other black brick and stained cedar volumes kind of helping to define some areas of kind of focus. This is a kind of sequence meandering through under the limbs of this oak tree around this kind of mysterious walled garden, and then when one enters the house, one gets this view back into the garden in the front, and there's that in the winter when it's not as lush as it should be, and the same view with these kind of punctuated light wells and things, giving a kind of unexpected sense of height in the middle of the house, and then from the backyard, sort of looking through. I really like this house. It was kind of the only client I think I've ever had that said, I really like dark. And we didn't quite believe them, I have to say. We said, well, you mean like walnut dark? And they really like black. And it was, it was a real pleasure. I mean, one of the things about working with individual home clients is that the work all becomes a collaboration between the architect and the client. And like one thing I'm quite proud of is the fact that our clients tend to feel like their homes are really theirs. And I remember hearing we did a house a long time ago, the Windsor East house, for a really interesting radiologist, and he was being interviewed for some article, and he was talking about when he had the idea to do this and we had the idea to do that. And I mean, I had a different memory of those things. Which at first my feeling was like, wait a minute, Thomas. And then I started feeling like really, really happy that he was claiming these as his, because it wasn't him living in my house, it was him living in his house. And so I feel like we go to a lot of effort to kind of understand the folks we work with, and my hope is that they all feel like these are actually their houses that are particular for them. Hopefully we steer them away from doing things that no one else will ever want in case they want to sell them, but that they, you know, they resonate with their own personalities. And this was a couple who really like dark. What do I have in here? So I guess I was putting in photographs that gave it a little bit of sequence, but also just tried to give you some understanding of how the building created this more informal family courtyard behind, and then a kind of more I guess, ornamental one in the front that acts as a kind of guard to the street, and it allows for privacy, allows the building to feel like it opens entirely, but still have a kind of great sense of privacy. And then the opportunity to kind of articulate the building as this kind of prime canvas against which one sees the kind of the incredible sort of shapes that nature makes, for example. And then there's always an interest in mystery, right? There's always a desire to do something unexpected. Like rather than having a ubiquitous flat roof that connects these two worlds, they're punctuated with these very tall spaces that let light in interesting and unexpected ways. Or very rich materials like this kind of blue-stained grass cloth, or when you open up a door, you start to get kind of other textures and colors and things like that, or a way that the house kind of is animated against the kind of condition of being pulled to the out of doors. And you know, obviously we have that kind of interest in making kind of purpose-made things that feel kind of lovely. In the house there's a two-story library that connects to the husband's office with this kind of bridge to get to the books before they're in, and then overlooks a double height screen porch, one of the nicest screen porches I think we ever did. Some of the details and material characters. The last house in Austin I want to show you kind of briefly is this house called the Cuernavaca House, which was again a very interesting circumstance. This is the river, and there are often kind of big estates on the river. But right on the other side of that had just a few years ago been very modest homes, a lot of trailer homes. There are a number of developments that have kind of come in, but there were still these kind of fairly large parcels of land, and they're starting to kind of turn over to be more I guess they're more valuable now. We just did a house around the corner from here for a kind of well-known musician, and then these people have been out here for a long time. Two sisters own the property with their husbands. One sister was here who'd built this, and the other was our client, and she and her husband and family lived in this pre-existing house for a number of years, and they built this pool house as a thing to share, and then they asked us to come in and do the house that would complete the ensemble and help to both define the precincts that of this larger property and have the house, I suppose, negotiate between them. So in the process, we kind of divided the property into two parcels, but also helped to try and organize the property so that this house, so that both houses could kind of share this pool, even though it belonged to our clients, and then have a kind of more public face, and then a private one around quite a beautiful tree. The house is organized in a fairly straightforward way, where one meanders through a kind of very beautiful landscape that David Hawker and his extraordinary team did. Not this. This was a kind of earlier version before we had a great landscape architect involved. Between the pool and the house, you meander through, and the kind of public rooms are all in here, and there's a kind of private wing with a master at the end. And upstairs are their offices, and they pretty much are here full time. David did this extraordinary landscape where there's a kind of drainage kind of alley that comes through, and one meanders through these kind of boardwalks into the house. They had an interest in concrete And so we kind of ran with that in board form concrete, in horizontal and vertical formats, and little boards and big boards. And in many ways, we got enamored with the way in which light would play off of this very dynamic and serendipitous material. This is the entry condition, where one enters a kind of this board form screen wall and gets a kind of hint of what's happening in the back. There's a certain kind of playfulness with the concrete, where we're trying to use different textures to embrace the kind of incredible Texas sun. And then in the backyard, there's this very beautiful courtyard that's sort of lush, thanks to David, and kind of intimate, that the house looks out into, beyond which then one has this sort of incredible view of the hills beyond and the cliffs and things like that. These are before the landscape was put in, these couple of iPhone snapshots, but I like them because they kind of catch the larger condition that the house is in, where one gets to see the kind of sun setting on the cliffs and things like that. And in many ways, I feel like this is an image that is indicative for me about a way of working in landscape, that the building, again, acts as a kind of frame against which one can see these other parts of the landscape. And obviously also become a kind of register for things like the orientation of the sun and the way that animates a building, inside and outside. And then the building is kind of articulated with a timber roof and this sort of interesting joists and skylights and fretted screens and things as a way to I guess, give points of stasis against this sort of omnipresent pull of the out of doors. We go to great effort to do these kind of custom window details and things where the glass literally goes floor to ceiling and has a kind of minimal detailing so that the outside is very present. But in that circumstance, we kind of pose it against like very rich kind of walnut detailing and kind of marble countertops so that there's some points of stasis against this kind of pull. And punctuated with double height spaces and a really terrific tall porch on the outside. And then the house is oriented in a way where one kind of gets into the master bedroom and gets to kind of appreciate, again, these kind of special trees. That tree in particular was important to the client. He's a very powerful and successful man, extraordinarily like thoughtful guy, but he went out here, they had oak wilt on the property, and he went out with a chainsaw and dealt with all of it, and this was a tree he saved, and it was really important to him. So it plays a big role in the composition of the house for us. They have surprises, like the sliding door to the master opens up a different texture, sort of bush hammered concrete behind the wall when it opens. This is the master bath, which has an outside and inside shower, but also is trying to make some play between privacy and openness. And then just a kind of series of kind of carefully made details against which you always have the view. There's some attempt to kind of find elements of the site, these kind of beautiful trees and things that resonate with aspects of the project. But really I was putting in this project because I was trying to put forth a sensibility about detail. Like we're very careful about these things, about sandblasting wood to get extra textures in when it's concrete is cast against it, for example. But in the end, my hope is that the building emphasizes the incredible beauty of the way that the sun passes across the sky more than looking at the thing itself. And then the play of soft things against hard things is always a pleasure. So I have spent far longer than I want getting here, but the house I really wanted to spend a little bit of time on is the house we did in Dallas. And we'll get to that in a minute, I guess. And what I wanted to say was I feel like I started my career, shall we say, making silk purses out of sow's ears. People coming for shelter, not art, and then trying to give them art. And then as I started getting commissions that had a little bit more authority, I based a lot of what I did in sites, in the places, because I was so enamored with the landscape that I was working in. I mean, I've been in Texas for almost 29 years now, but I still feel like I'm still overwhelmed with the sort of specialness of this landscape. And so many of the works we did are grounded in these live oaks or the sort of topography or interesting conditions that happen here. And then we came to Dallas and met these extraordinary folks that wanted something really special. I mean, these were not people just asking for shelter. They wanted shelter for sure, but they also wanted poetry. And we're clear about that. They wanted something special. That was a kind of, it's one thing to try and give poetry to someone who doesn't want it. They're like, oh, thank you very much, we've got something extra. It was kind of a higher task that, raised the bar, which is always a little intimidating. And to top that off, it was in a beautiful part of town, but it's the only site I feel like I've ever worked on that didn't have any particular natural features of its own to respond to. There wasn't a significant tree or a great view or something like that. So it became a kind of constructed landscape that we engaged. We did have it was a amazing team we worked with, an extraordinary builder, Steve Hild, and again, David Hocker was a great partner in this. That was a kind of pleasure to all work together. It's in Highland Park. You know the kind of circumstance it's in. It's set up as they're not all traditional houses, but I put this on really to point out that the structure is set up to have a villa in the middle of a lot. In fact, the code is set up so that one has to put 50% of the building area in front of this 50-foot building line, but behind that line. And so, at a certain level, like, it doesn't take a genius to realize, like, really what they want is something like this, right? A big house in the middle of a piece of property, they're beautiful houses. I mean, I don't mean to say anything derogatory about them, but there's a kind of clear agenda there. And that, of course, started to become something that, the context with which we worked. And our clients are collectors of art and really quite extraordinary and challenging pieces, and wanted something really special, and lived across the street for construction, so there was no pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. No, they were active participants all the way through. And for us, this became a kind of opportunity to try and design something that would be its own world, with all the pleasures of a constructed landscape. In fact, the kind of pleasures of that created landscape became more and more clear to us as we start to realize how much more control you have when you don't have to react to that existing tree and its critical root zone, for example. So this is the kind of overall view of the house. It's you can guess where those lines are. The building had to sit between, and 50% of the floor area is here. And we created a building that was a kind of hockey stick-shaped thing that kind of, it had one of the things that was interesting about the site is it had this kind of alley on two sides of it and a significant street frontage. And they wanted a family house, but they also have this amazing collection of art, and they wanted to be able to live with the art and live in a beautiful landscape. And then they also have a kind of private gallery on the property, and which is this building, and a cabana in the back. For me, I guess it offered the opportunity as a kind of, or I suppose we were presenting it as a kind of counter proposal to the contemporary villas that mark this kind of Tony neighborhood. And here, I would say, an incredible new landscape. It both does things like disguise the garage volume and things like that, but is an invitation to occupy the land in a new and exciting way. I think one of the most interesting things about art is not so much what it looks like, but how it might allow one to see the world in a new and refreshed way, hopefully an enlightened way. And I think my hope with this building is that the consequence of this actually allows a similar kind of set of insights. It's set up as a kind of hovering, fairly abstract limestone bar over a real kind of glass condition that negotiates between this very beautiful front courtyard that's kind of enclosed by this sort of constructed hillside, and a family courtyard in the back that has a pool and a big yard and all kinds of things like that. So while our clients wanted something special, they have children. They wanted all of the things that you want to have with children. The sort of all of the function and necessity to have different living spaces and the opportunity to throw a ball or something with them in and around their collection. It is set up where one kind of enters under a kind of cantilevering part of that limestone volume, and then entering into the kind of formal living area between two glass walls with a kitchen that opens onto a family room The garage is under that volume, and kind of service stuff here, with the gallery, his office here, and a cabana in the back. And then upstairs, the master is here with the master suite around this sort of hole in the volume, a double height living space, kind of gallery, and then the sort of children's wing, it's a playroom. Sensible. It's again set up as this kind of hovering mass that's very minimally articulated, that sort of gently defines a living area caught between this world and that world, that have been just extraordinarily articulated by David and his team. The volume cantilevers over the kind of entry area. That's a 35-foot cantilever, and then unexpectedly there's a hole in that cantilever that helps to define an entry condition that is pretty special. This is the entry. I mean, it's a marvel. You know, if David weren't here, I would take full credit for all of this sort of brilliance of how you meander through. But it's like, I mean, what a great partner. The thing is set up as this landscape that actually fits in an interesting way, but totally stands apart. And as you meander through under this extraordinary volume that's kind of hovering, well, slightly out of order. So sorry, that's the entry condition. When it's just here, this is just, it was hard to get actually a photograph of the whole building because it's long. This is this unadulterated volume, or slightly adulterated, where the pattern of the Indiana limestone starts to break up to make a screen for an outside courtyard that allows the inside rooms upstairs to have another source of light and air. But this is the kind of main living space that's caught between these two worlds. And then the building and the living in it is sort of animated by an ever-changing landscape. Right. So one enters under this volume. The kind of art is engaged with the kind of architecture of the building. This kind of amazing piece by, I think this is Stephen Perino, here, that with they had an art collection already, and we had the privilege of being able to design around some of these things, thinking this was going to be here, although things changed too. Anyway, there's this kind of very beautiful entry courtyard where the volume that slides over you is then interrupted by this abstract skylight, I guess. I don't know if you can call it a skylight, hole to the ceiling, to the sky, that we articulated with flush glass all around, that has the master suite wrapping around it, that occasionally opens up to look into that sort of tree, but is really a kind of wonderful moment where as one enters the building, one is reintroduced to the sky, with kind of wonderful effects and things happening because of the light reflected off the fountain and the sort of richness that's sort of planted in and around the tree. This is a view from his office, looking back towards the street, and it's such a beautifully layered landscape where one sees a whole series of spaces kind of caught between the street and the room that you're in. And we of course paid quite a lot of attention to making huge windows that are absolutely kind of minimally detailed, so that the outside and this kind of volume in front of you were kind of ever present there. In the backyard, the building takes this sort of bend to define a more intimate area, while kind of a collection of these beautiful sky-frame doors open up to allow the outside and the inside to merge. The building itself is helping to define this, this newfound space in the middle of the property. And inside, while there's this kind of thrust to be outside, this double height space on the living room helps to kind of contain that as a significant space in and of itself. With this double height fireplace, and it's the only place that limestone reappears on the inside of the house. Curved glass is kind of put in a few key places that continue this relationship to the outside, but also I think create extraordinary and complicated reflections, and make the relationship between inside and outside more complex, because because you're both getting reflections that are distorted for the curve and seen through and things like that, there and here. In the kitchen, that's kind of caught between the main living area and the kind of family room, and then looking out onto the this kind of narrow wedge between the alley and the property. It's kind of planted heavily for privacy, but then also has this kind of grotto that descends into the lower level. That's the two spaces, the kind of kitchen, breakfast room, and then the outside of that same space. Sorry, I'm rushing through because I'm recognizing that we're kind of short on time. This is the wife's office, sort of, which is like the control room, the spot in the house that you see everything. Cockpit, you can see out to the street as well as what's going on inside, and be very aware of what's going on with your children. And then kind of moments where that behind that screen, in the front of the building, there's this courtyard that brings light into the inside of the house and kind of animates it with shadow. The gallery leading back to the master suite, which has a kind of rotating art exhibit, and as one goes through, one gets to kind of participate in in what's going on in the living room. And then inside, there was a kind of attempt to try and use the same language, but to soften it, to start to allow this to be a quieter space with both privacy and I don't know, a solemnness, I suppose. And the gallery was carefully calibrated with a lot of attention to doing things simply as a kind of basis for the art being the real focus, but also to get the light quality appropriate for the art collections that would go through. And then his office is just around the corner from this. Right? And then there were a couple of interesting things, like a kind of wall panel that opens up and allows the garden to participate in, or the gallery and the garden to intertwine. The cabana then has a slightly different kind of vibe to the whole thing, a little more Guadalajara than Highland Park, but a kind of fabulous counterpoint, both of the furniture and the texture from the fabulous Jose Noe ceramics, and David's kind of reworking of this patio outside the cabana. I think one of the things that's like so interesting to me about this building is this sort of opportunity to do a building that would be simultaneously powerfully present and materially articulated, but hopefully also oscillate between its presence and being a kind of backdrop for these other things, for both the natural conditions that are, some of which have been kind of brought in, and some of which are just the kind of path, the light as it changes over the course of the day. And for me, I really enjoyed the opportunity to do to try and do a building that wasn't demure, wasn't just trying to be a primed canvas, but also had those qualities. And I hope some of the qualities that I was trying to explain in the house in Austin show up sort of obviously in these. Bringing that tree in, I'm sure, was no small feat. And just, I mean, a shout out to the contractor. They were a challenging set of drawings. Just, I don't know how well this is a shot from my iPhone, but to get the stone to line up with this kind of blade, to line up, to carefully work into the wood wall, and there was a degree of kind of abstraction and carefulness that was difficult to build. But I kind of feel like that adds a quality to the house, like maybe it's the Marxist in me, like there was a lot of work put into this house, and I feel like you sense it, a lot of care. Right. And I think that's all I've got. So thank you very much.